Welcome to the hidden corners where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind.
Well, once again, this is the Wolfman Chronicles. We're up to Book 6, Episode 70. Now, Chapter 6, and it's a new year for werewolves. This is still in Achill Island. Who doesn't love a party on New Year's? Miguel laughed as he raised his mug of Guinness in a toast. This little Irish town of Dugort certainly seemed a bit more festive and cheerier with the entire family bringing in the new year. The little pub in town was alive with the spirit of New Year's Eve. Its stone walls and timber beams glowing warmly under the soft light of flickering candles and strings of fairy lights. Several locals had brought in their fiddles and tin whistles and were playing lively Irish jigs and drinking songs. The crowd clapped in time with the rhythm, some even breaking into impromptu jigs. Now, between songs, the air buzzed with laughter and chatter as locals and visitors alike shared stories and toasted to the year ahead. Now listen to this, Kat said from across the table, reading from a small guidebook. If a red-haired girl is the first person to walk into your home after the clock has struck 12, she will bring a hardship for the new year. However, if it's a dark-haired man, you're in luck. A happy and prosperous year ahead is guaranteed. Good things y'all have dark hair. Well, except Grizzly. Well, I'll just be locking my little hot red-headed girlfriend in the bathroom then, he laughed, while Rosa kicked him under the table. He put on his best grizzled puppy face and he said, "Oh, darling, you know I only have eyes for you." Everyone laughed as Rosa threw her head back and pretended to be upset with Grizzly. Here's another one, Kat continued. Banging bread on the doors and walls is meant to get rid of any bad luck held in the house, and it encourages a plentiful supply of food for the coming year. And then you must clean the house from top to bottom, always with a new broom for a fresh new start. And at the stroke of midnight, you should walk in the front door and out the back door of your house. Now that way you'll be bringing in the good luck and taking all the bad luck out the back. Miguel raised his glass to Rosa. When we were children, Rosa would do that. She'd sweep all the bad luck out the back door with a broom. Remember that, Rosa? Oh, yes, Rosa agreed. I still do that every year. In with the good, out with the bad, she laughed. The waitress now, a rosy-cheeked woman with a lilting accent and a sparkle in her eye, set steaming bowls of Irish beef and Guinness stew in front of everyone at the table. Aye, we do have our traditions, she said, tucking her tray under her arm, as she lingered at the table, clearly enjoying the chance to share a bit of Irish lore. Now, for one, you might have noticed the sprig of holly above the door. It brings good luck, and it keeps the mischief makers at bay, it does. And don't you dare forget to leave the front door unlocked at midnight. It's to welcome in the new year, and to let the old one out, of course, her grin widened, and to let the spirits of our dearly departed in so they can visit their loved ones. And if you're brave enough, you can try the first footer tradition. Now, the first person to cross your threshold after midnight decides your luck for the year. A tall, dark-haired man's the best omen, so just don't let anyone barge in first. The waitress winked at Miguel. Now just then the musician struck up a lively tune, and the waitress whisked off to tend to the next table. Sláinte, Carl toasted, raising his glass of Irish whiskey in the air. May your troubles be as short as your resolutions. Jack laughed. I think I can get behind that one. Now the countdown was fast approaching, and the atmosphere grew more rowdy as the night progressed. Rosa reached into her purse and pulled out a cloth bag tied with a bright red ribbon. She opened it carefully, revealing dozens of plump purple and green grapes. The group looked at her curiously as she began counting out 12 for each person. "This," she began with a smile, "is las 12 uvas de la suerte, the 12 grapes of luck. At midnight, you eat one grape for each chime of the clock. Each grape represents a month of the coming year, and if you can eat all 12 in time, it's said to bring you a year of good luck and prosperity." Jack chuckled. 12 grapes in 12 seconds? That sounds like a dangerous challenge. "Yeah, it's trickier than you think," Rosa admitted, laughing, "but it's not about speed. You focus on your hopes for each month as you eat each grape. It's a moment of reflection, mixed with a bit of fun chaos if you're trying to keep up with the chimes." Rosa's voice dipped to a playful whisper. "If all the grapes are sweet, you'll have an easy year ahead of you. But if you get a sour grape, that will be a very rough month. And if you don't finish all 12 grapes, well, it's bad luck." Grizzly leaned back in his chair, his thick arms crossed over his chest as he eyed the group, a playful glint in his eye. "I thought we were supposed to kiss at the stroke of midnight," he grumbled, his gravelly voice cutting through the chatter. "Not choke on a mouthful of grapes." Rosa chuckled, tossing a grape at him with a teasing grin. "Maybe try swallowing the grapes first." Grizzly caught that grape midair and popped it into his mouth with exaggerated gusto, chewing noisily. "I'm just saying," he drawled, his tone locked with mock indignation. "What kind of New Year's Eve doesn't end with a kiss? Now that's tradition too, you know. Guarantees you won't end up having a lonely, miserable year." Jack raised his pint in Grizzly's direction. "I'll raise a toast to that, old man." As the clock inched closer to midnight, everyone in the pub stood, their glasses raised high, ready to ring in the new year in true Irish style. No one knew for certain how many grapes got eaten, how many ended up on the floor, and how many were thrown at one another, but at the 12th stroke of midnight, the pub erupted into cheers and laughter and a spontaneous chorus of auld lang syne. The air filled with the sounds of clinking glasses and heavy shouts of Happy New Year, the occasional squeal as someone dodged yet another flying grape. Confetti and streamers seemed to appear just about out of nowhere, tossed into the air as if by magic, adding bursts of color to the already lively scene. Everyone who was fortunate enough to have someone to kiss left their forgotten glasses of merriment for the moment as the musicians launched into a jubilant reel, and someone started a spontaneous ceilidh in the middle of the room. Chairs were pushed aside as couples spun and stomped, their laughter rising above the lively music. Even old Grizzly found himself pulled into the dance, stumbling a little on his bad leg and letting Rosa dance around him, spinning her skirt. Now for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The flicker of the firelight, the warmth of the crowd, and the promise of a new year ahead enveloped them all. It was a perfect start, joyful and full of hope, with no thought of the impending darkness that lurked under Sleevemore Mountain. It was now nearly 1 o'clock when they began their walk home. The babysitter, a young girl of 15 that Father O'Malley had recommended, had been eager to earn a few dollars watching the twins, now especially since the kids were already asleep when she arrived. She had brought a book and was curled up in front of the fire in a cozy big chair when the gang walked in from the bar. "Let's get you home," Jack said as he handed the girl her coat and grabbed the car keys. "I can walk," Kara said. I just live down the street." "Well, then I'll walk you home then," Jack replied. It was a short walk to Kara's house, and Jack made sure she was safely inside before walking back. And as the porch light switched off, Jack noticed an elderly woman looking down from the upstairs window. Probably her grandmother, Jack thought. Just as he began to turn and walk away, the old woman crossed herself and dropped the lace curtains. As Jack walked back home, he thought of the incident that had occurred a few days earlier. Christmas at the old fisherman's cottage had been magical, as expected. Rosa had worked her usually culinary magic, and transforming that kitchen into a haven of rich, mouth-watering aromas. She'd made a traditional Irish Christmas dinner with tender roasted lamb and 4 different potato dishes that disappeared almost as soon as they were brought to the table. The twins were overjoyed to find gifts from Santa under the Christmas tree that morning, hand-carved wooden animals and cozy sweaters that Sasha swore were knitted by Mrs. Claus herself. The day had been filled with laughter and warmth, but it was the night that lingered in everyone's minds, the events creating a sense of unease they just couldn't quite shake. Once the twins were sound asleep and tucked safely in their beds, the adults set off for a midnight mass at the old stone church where Father O'Malley was leading his Christmas sermon. Grizzly stayed behind to babysit. His leg was aching and he knew he wouldn't be able to keep that trek up to the mountain with the rest of them. He was content to sit in front of the fire and nap while the twins slept soundly upstairs. The service was solemn yet beautiful, and the flicker of candlelight casting warm glow on the ancient walls as hymns and carols filled the air. The scent of burning incense mingled with the pine boughs and the wreaths that adorned the church pews. Now, it had been a long time since Jack had attended a service that hadn't put him to sleep. Afterwards, the tradition continued with candlelight vigil, a quiet procession up the winding path to the cemetery on Sleepmore Mountain. Once they were there, they lit candles for loved ones who had passed. The climb was cold but peaceful, the snow crunching under their boots as their breath clouded in the frosty air. The cemetery, nestled among the ruins of the ancient deserted village, was eerily serene, the flickering candles casting long shadows across the weathered gravestones. Jack and Sasha kept a close eye on the surroundings, the memory of the previous moonlight excursion up that mountain fresh in their minds. Nothing seemed amiss until that group began to make their way back down the mountain. Suddenly, the air seemed to change. It was kind of a strange stillness fell over the landscape, and the soft rustling of wind through the trees just vanished. "I thought I saw something," Rosa whispered, her candle trembling in her hand. "Over there by that old stone cross." The others turned, their eyes straining in the dim light. At first it seemed like nothing more than a trick of the shadows, but then it happened again. A faint movement, like a figure slipping behind one of the gravestones. A low, mournful sound suddenly echoed through the air, soft and distant, yet unmistakably human. It sent a shiver down their spines, the kind of sound that seemed to settle deep into their bones. And like a protective shepherd guarding his flock, Father O'Malley called everyone in close, his voice steady despite the unease spreading through the group. Everyone instinctively drew nearer, their candle flames flickering in the cold night air. Several members of the congregation shone their flashlights out into the dark, illuminating the tumbled stones and the Celtic crosses covered with moss. Father O'Malley's voice was firm. "My friends," he said, "there is nothing to fear here tonight. This is sacred ground, watched over by those who came before us. Whatever you think you saw or heard, let us not let our imaginations run wild." His words carried weight, although he couldn't mask the way his eyes scanned the shadowed edges of the graveyard. He held his candle up high, its light casting a soft glow on the rugged lines of his face. "Let us pray," he said, bowing his head, "for peace and for protection and for the souls of our dearly departed." Now the group followed his lead, their murmured prayers rising into the still night. Yet even as they prayed, there was an undercurrent of tension and fear throughout the crowd. The air seemed heavier, the silence was deeper, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Jack's eyes were sharp, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement, his instincts on high alert. Miguel whispered to him, "Something's not right here. I'm seeing shadows over there." He nodded his head towards the direction he was looking. A fog began rising up from the ground, and it seemed as if the small congregation were becoming enveloped in a mist. Cat held tightly onto Usko's arm and whispered, I feel my hair standing on end. I feel danger. Usko nodded to her in agreement. Another mournful cry sounded in the dark, coming from a different direction this time. Father O'Malley quickly led the congregation in a tight group down the path. Don't stray, don't become separated, and don't panic. There's nothing to fear. Stay close and keep your candles lit. Whatever it is, the light will guide us home. As they descended the mountain path, the uneasy feeling followed them, clinging with the mist. The faint, mournful sounds echoed once more, so distant it could almost be dismissed as the wind. Almost. Father O'Malley paused, briefly, before quietly urging them onward. And that night, back at the church, the small group was abuzz with excitement and dread. The locals were convinced that the sound that they heard on the mountain was a banshee. A few whispered of a curse tied to the ruins. Even Father O'Malley, despite his reassurances, was a little bit unraveled. Later, back in the warmth of Fisherman's Cottage, Sasha took out one of the books she had been reading. A banshee is a female spirit in Irish folklore who heralds the death of a family member, usually by screaming, wailing, shrieking, or keening. If someone is about to enter a situation where it's unlikely they're going to come out alive, she will warn people by screaming or wailing. Mentions of banshees go as far back as 1380 in Irish and Norman literature. No wonder the congregation was scared, Juanita remarked with her usual bluntness. Imagine hearing that cry in the middle of a cemetery, after midnight no less. It's enough to make anyone's skin crawl. Well, maybe it wasn't a banshee at all, Grizzly cut in. Could have been some local messing around trying to scare folk. Sounded pretty real to me, Sasha replied, and after what we saw in that cemetery a week ago, I wouldn't be surprised by a banshee at all. Miguel shrugged his shoulders, leaning back in his chair with a sheepish grin. Hell, that thing sent shivers down my spine. I'd take a mavka any day over one of those banshees. For a brief moment, the room was silent as Miguel's words settled over everyone in the room. Then, like the crack of a dam, laughter erupted, filling that cozy space. Juanita wiped a tear from her eye. Really, Miguel? You'd prefer being bound for life to a forest spirit who lures men to their doom over a wailing messenger of death? Miguel raised his hands in mock defense. Hey, at least with a mavka, you get a pretty face before things go south. A banshee just terrifies you right straight off. Even Grizzly couldn't help but let out a rumbling grumble. She probably showed up tonight just because Miguel was there. He's a damn magnet. As the laughter died down, the warmth of the moment lingered, chasing away some of the unease from the events of the night. Now, the memory of that night hung heavy in the air. Something was brewing on that mountain, in the ruins of the deserted village, and whatever it was, it refused to be ignored. The next morning, Jack's phone buzzed on the nightstand, its faint vibration pulling him from a restless sleep. The display showed Father O'Malley's name, and Jack answered quickly, concern flickering at the edge of his groggy thoughts. The priest's voice was calm, but insistent. Jack, I need you to stop by the rectory as soon as you can break away from the family. It's important. I'd prefer to speak with you privately. Jack rubbed a hand over his face, sitting up as the rain pattered heavily against the window. Give me 30 minutes, he replied, already pulling on a sweater. Sasha's brow furrowed in concern. Is everything all right? I'm not sure, Jack replied, slipping on his boots. Let everyone know I'll be late for breakfast and go on without me. Rosa was cooking breakfast in the guest house down the street. Sasha nodded, watching him grab his jacket and hat before heading out into the storm. The rain was heavy, a cold driving force that soaked through his jacket within minutes, but Jack barely noticed. The walk to the old church was quick, and Jack's mind was racing with possibilities of what the father might have to say. Jack shook off the rain as he stepped inside the old stone church. Father O'Malley was waiting for him, led him through to the rectory, his face shadowed with worry. "Jack," the priest greeted him, "thank you for coming at such a short notice. I'm sorry to pull you away from your family." "Of course," Jack replied, noting the tension in O'Malley's face. "What's going on?" The priest gestured for Jack to sit, closing the door behind him. He took a deep breath. His hands rested on the back of his chair as if steadying himself. "It's about what happened the other night on Sleevemore," he began, his voice low, "and something I found last night while going through the parish archives." Jack leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Well, what did you find?" Father O'Malley hesitated, as if searching for just the right words. "Excuse me, I should have offered you some tea." No, I'm fine. Just go ahead with what you want to tell me," Jack replied. Father O'Malley pulled an old leather-bound journal from a stack of books and slid it across the coffee table to Jack. "This belonged to one of my predecessors. He served here in the early 1800s, around the time the deserted village was abandoned. I believe it may hold clues to what we encountered, and why the village has always carried a dark reputation." Jack carefully opened the journal, its yellowed pages crackling under his fingers. The handwriting inside was neat but faint. The ink faded with time. "You just now found this?" he asked. "No, well, yes, actually. There is a cupboard in the back of the storage shed outside filled with remnants and mementos from previous pastors. It has always felt off limits, personal. I've never opened any of the boxes before. But after what happened at the cemetery the other night, I got an urge to see if anyone else had mentioned something like this happening in the past. I've been poring through the boxes the past several days, but late last night I came across this journal." Jack began skimming through the contents of the journal. One word stood out, repeated across multiple pages. "Ananajval." "And what does that mean?" he says. Father O'Malley sighed deeply before answering. "The devil." Jack looked up sharply, noting how pale the priest had become. "The book was written in the 1800s, Jack said slowly, his voice edged with disbelief. "What does it have to do with what's happening here today? I don't understand." Father O'Malley reached out, carefully taking the book from Jack's hands as though it were something fragile or dangerous. "It's written in Old Gaelic," he explained, a difficult language to translate if someone isn't completely familiar with its nuances. But what I have been able to piece together so far is very disturbing." He flipped to a page near the middle of the journal where the writing grew denser, the ink was darker, as if the writer's hand had grown more desperate. The priest who kept this journal believed the deserted village was cursed, not just by misfortunes or natural causes, but by something otherworldly. He wrote of many strange occurrences, of shadows that moved without cause, unusual deaths, mutated and mutilated animals. Jack leaned closer in. The words on the page, almost unreadable to him, but the tension in the air unmistakable. But why would he use that word? The devil. Was it superstition, or did he truly believe? Father O'Malley cut him off, his tone grave. He believed it. He wrote that the villagers were plagued by something malevolent. He described rituals, practices that he condemned as pagan or blasphemous, and he claimed that those rituals brought forth a darkness that could not be undone. But that was happening all over the country during those times, Jack insisted. Witches burned at the stake simply because they could heal with herbs, or supposedly enchant men to leave their wives because of their beauty. Now, if a child was stillborn, the midwife was accused of the death. If a farmer had a cow that died, someone in the village would be accused of cursing it. History is full of stories like that. Father O'Malley nodded his head. I agree with what you're saying, and certainly Ireland has had its fair share of mythical legends, but We both know that something disturbing and possibly dangerous is going on out there on the mountain." Jack's stomach tightened and the weight of the priest's words sinking in. "And you think whatever he was talking about is connected to what's happening now?" "Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence," Father O'Malley admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something is stirring, Jack, something tied to the past, to those ruins, and perhaps even to the people who remain here." Jack sat back, his mind racing. "So what do we do?" The priest closed the journal with a heavy thud. "First, we try to understand. I'll continue translating this journal, but we need to be cautious. If the writings are true, and if this darkness has indeed returned, then we must tread carefully. It may not be something we can face alone." "Well, we won't be facing it alone, but we need a plan," Jack replied. I'm going to go talk to Malachi today. Does it say anywhere in the journal how they banished it last time?" Father O'Malley shook his head. I'm sure it does, but I haven't read that far into it yet. But Jack, we might be running out of time. Malachi has not spoken to me in years, but if he'd be willing to set his differences aside, perhaps we can all meet in a few days' time and formulate a plan of action. "Well, I'll speak to him about that," Jack replied. "Now's not the time to harbor old grudges, and I don't know how long I can keep my family here. The sooner we take care of this thing, the better it's going to be." Father O'Malley stood, his expression softening just enough to offer a faint, weary smile as he extended his hand. Jack rose and clasped it firmly, the warmth of the gesture at odds with the chill creeping into his thoughts. "I'm glad I have you in my circle of friends, Jack," the priest said, his voice low but sincere. "Whatever this is, we'll face it together." Jack nodded, though the weight of O'Malley's words settled uneasily in his chest. He glanced once more at that journal, now closed, but still emanating a strange gravity, as if it were more than just an old handwritten book. "Well, let me know as soon as you find anything else," Jack said, stepping towards the door. "You'll be the first to know," O'Malley replied, but his tone carried an undercurrent of worry he couldn't quite hide. As Jack stepped out into the rain, the storm had eased into a steady drizzle, but the clouds overhead remained thick and oppressive. The walk back to the guest house felt longer this time, his mind turning over the priest's ominous words and the unsettling phrases in the journal. If what the priest had told him was true, this was more than he'd anticipated. When he reached the front porch, the door swung open before he could even knock. Sasha stood there, her face a mix of relief and tension. "What took you so long?" she asked, pulling him inside and shutting the door against the cold. Jack hesitated, unsure how much to share quite yet. "O'Malley found something. An old journal. It might give us answers, but..." "But what?" Sasha pressed, her eyes narrowing. Jack sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "It's not good, Sasha. He thinks what we're dealing with is tied to something very dark. Something that's been festering here for a long time." And before she could respond, the twins ran into the room, their faces pale with fright. "Uncle Jack, Aunt Sasha," one of them cried, grabbing Sasha's hand. "What's wrong?" Jack asked, crouching to their level. "We saw her," the other twin whispered, trembling. "Who?" Sasha asked gently, though her voice was tight with concern. "The scary lady," they said in unison. Their eyes were wide. "She was at the window, watching us. She was sitting in the tree and she just floated over to the window." "Yeah, like she was flying," Una said, excitedly spreading her arms like she could fly. "And then she opened her mouth and..." Just then the screen door rattled in the wind and a mournful wail echoed through the house. Sasha and Jack exchanged a look as they held the twins close. "Shh," Sasha said gently. "That's just the wind. Nothing more."
Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope you'll join us next week for another installment of the Wolfman Chronicles. And until then, I hope you all have a wonderful new year. Aflin Fui Washagwich. Happy New Year.